Hello and welcome to the big episode 20 of Beyond the Box Score. Trayvon Hastings, Joey Korzanowski with me as always. We're going to cut right into this. We're going to try to keep this inside an hour. We've got a lot we want to talk about. We're going to start with the NBA trade deadline. We're going to end with a Super Bowl preview. So let's jump right into what stuck out to you during this NBA trade deadline. Who were some winners? Who were some losers? What were some surprises?
Yeah, it was a pretty active trade deadline. Honestly, it kind of took away from the Super Bowl buzz a little bit. I don't. I mean, there were a couple of big trades. I would say like everybody was kind of waiting on Giannis. I would say James Harden was obviously the biggest surprise. But I think in terms of winners, I know we'll talk about the James Harden Cavs, the Kings game last night a little bit. I thought the Cavs were a big winner at the trade deadline. I think James Harden was a huge get for them in trying to win a finals this year. The Jazz made a big move. The Wizards made a big move. I think those two trades are rather interesting, though. It's just hard to tell because when you talk winners and losers, you think like the Cavs, right? Like the teams trying to make a move that makes them better for this year. Well, that's not necessarily the case for the Jazz and the Wizards. We were talking just now before we started recording. I don't know how much of a fan I am of the Jaren Jackson trade or even the Anthony Davis trade. It's too hard to tell right now because it seems like both teams are kind of punting on this year, and it's only February 8th. And there's still a ton of regular season to go still, and it seems like teams are already gearing towards next year. But you look at the Jazz. I mean, they're 20 games under 500, and they're not necessarily going all in, but they're putting all their chips in the Jaren Jackson uh, kind of side of things, and then going to bank on the draft this year. But like it just feels like a buying move at the trade deadline for a team that's 25 games or 20 games under 500. Certainly interesting. But I will say the Jazz didn't really give up a ton for Jaren Jackson. It's not like they sold the house. I mean, they kept a lot of their young talent, and you go and get a guy who just won a Defensive Player of the Year 2 years ago, a guy who is a very clearly very good 3-point shooter. And when you look at the Jazz roster, I think it makes sense. You put a guy like Jaren Jackson around their young guards and Ace Bailey, Collier, Keontae George. I think there's definitely some potential there. So I would say the Jazz were a winner at the deadline, but a little too early to tell. But then the Wizards, I just don't really know how to feel about it because Anthony Davis is just such a wild card at this point. I mean, I think he's only played over 70 games in a season once in the last couple of years, so his availability has just simply been a problem. And who knows how much he was really bought in Dallas. He clearly saw that Dallas was going through a rebuild, and post Luka trade, obviously that was going to happen. But then there's reports of him being disgruntled with the Wizards because he doesn't want to sit through a whole rebuild either. But the Wizards are kind of in the same position as the Jazz, right? I know they're kind of tanking out this year. If you can get one of these good rookies in the draft, and it is going to be a deep NBA draft class, you could potentially have some success next year. So I think I like the Jaren Jackson trade a little bit more than the Anthony Davis trade. But overall, it's a little too early to tell how good just these trades are, but definitely steps in the right direction for these two teams.
For me, I think one of my biggest winners would definitely be uh, what the Wizards and Hornets were both able to do at the deadline. For Charlotte, they pivoted off of Colin Sexton and essentially upgraded his role into what Kobe White is going to be for them. And Kobe White's a better version of Colin Sexton. He's a better playmaker, overall better shooter, and he's going to be able to score off their bench. I like what the Hornets have done very quietly with their rebuild. They've done a really good job at building up a really nice young core. They've got all those guys playing together. Four of those five guys are averaging between 16 and 19 points. Brandon Miller over 19 at 20. So I do think the Hornets will be a team to monitor here in the second half of the year, especially considering they won again the other night, 25 and 28 now. They've got a chance to sneak into the play-in and potentially win that play-in and guarantee themselves a playoff spot. And I think if they can get a somewhat favorable matchup in the playoffs, I know they'll be the lower seed, but they've got a lot of firepower offensively, and they're going to be able to put pressure on teams defensively. For the Wizards, I just have an appreciation for the fact that they have basically planned this entire rebuild out. It's been very strategic in terms of asset management. They went from the lowest of the low with Bradley Beal, and they were able to turn that into the Chris Paul situation, Jordan Poole situation, and then they move off Jordan Poole eventually, and they've just turned that into Anthony Davis and Trae Young, two players who should honestly warrant more in trades for those players, but because their value is at the lowest it probably ever has been, they were able to not trade the house for Anthony Davis or for Trae Young. So I do think, in terms of risk reward, it isn't as one might think. Like, there is a lot of reward. I don't necessarily think there's a lot of risk because, say it doesn't work out, they're still rebuilding. So maybe next year they would remain in the lottery. I know in terms of their front office, they've already stated that their deconstruction phase, as they call it, is over. Like, they think that's over. This is their chance to now start moving towards the we're going to try to win basketball games side of it into the future years. But also for Utah, they made trades similarly to Washington in terms of adding a high level player, a high productivity player to their team right now. And despite the lack of winning, it's a move for the future seasons that I think could work out. It really just depends on, like we were talking earlier, really just depends on how that Utah offense will function because they have several ball stoppers. There's not a lot of guys that can play make on that team. And there's also, at times, like, there's enough shooting, but you give up Walter Clayton in this trade. You send him to Memphis. That's going to be one of your better shooters moving forward, so he's gone. It's not that Jaren Jackson Lowry can't shoot. It's just on the nights where maybe they both are not shooting the ball well, they're going to struggle offensively because you have Walker Kessler, who isn't a stretch big. You have Keontae George, and then you really have a wing position that you can fill with anybody. You could put Ace Bailey in there. You could put Bryce Sensabaugh in there. It really doesn't matter. They're going to have one of the bigger lineups in the entire NBA, which might help them defensively. It might hurt them at the same time, though. So I think for the winners, I think in terms of the lower level teams, I also liked what the Thunder did. They finally used a first round pick to trade for a player, and with SGA being out, they were able to sneak in, get a trade in, get Jared McCain as well. I think that's going to be a very good trade for the Thunder. They needed another guard off their bench that could create and score the basketball and shoot. And we're starting to see more of the flaws in the Thunder team this year. I mean, we went from talking about them winning 74, 75 games to they're at 13 losses. They're tied for the best record in the league with Detroit. So I just think the Thunder did a, once again, marvelous job at somehow, some way, just doing something at the deadline that we don't expect them to do. We'll talk about the Harden trade. Um, I like kind of what the Pacers did, getting Zubac for what they traded out, being Isaiah Jackson, Benedict Mathurin, and 2 first-round picks. I do think it's kind of a lot for Zubac. However, he's going to be somebody that when this core is healthy next season, and they likely add a top 3 pick, whether that's Boozer, Mathurin, or DeBonsta, it doesn't really matter. Their core is going to be electric next season with Halliburton back, and I think Zubac is a really good fit for what they want to do. I know he's not a Miles Turner type. He's not even a Jay Huff type defensively, but offensively, his efficiency is going to be at an all-time high next year in that Pacers offense. I don't really love. They've been one of the best teams in the league for the last month and a half, and they essentially pivoted off 2 of their 3 best players. But their thing is financial flexibility in not only this offseason, but in 2027. So I think for accomplishing that, they did what they were supposed to do. But I don't know how many losers I would say that there was overall. I'm curious what your thoughts are on it. I have a few losers, but I'm not sure if you have a few losers.
I think when you talk losers, I would honestly, I'd maybe point to the Clippers a little bit because I mean you just mentioned Zubac, but like I don't really think they got a ton in return for him, and Zubac was a pretty big piece to that offense. I don't. It's funny you mentioned the fit in with the Pacers. The only thing is Zubac, he's a much slower center. He just doesn't really seem like he fits kind of what Rick Carlisle and the Pacers. They've kind of been that run and gun team. They're going to get you up and down the floor. They're going to wear you down. That's just not really Zubac. And maybe they're trending in a little bit of a different direction. Maybe Halliburton comes back from his injury and he wants to play a little bit slower. Maybe he loses some of that up tempo in his game. So that could be interesting. But that's obviously a big question mark. But yeah, when you look at the Clippers, all right, you gave up Zubac. I think most Clipper fans are probably happy that they moved off James Harden because they got that younger Darius Garland in return. But Darius Garland's another wild card. I just being a Cavs fan, I got to witness it up front. He's just hasn't been healthy, and it's been in the playoffs as well. But my question is, is this injury going to linger? Because it sounds like both feet are a little banged up right now, and he's dealing with toe injuries on both feet. And I've heard from multiple people in the NBA, multiple people that have dealt with similar injuries. That thing lingers. You know, he's going to be dealing with that throughout the course of his career. So I mean, if he's going to continually be missing games throughout the year, you know, it's just going to be tough to see the Clippers really winning this trade here. I understand, you know, James Harden might not be with the Cavs for much longer than, 2 years, 3 years, maybe max. But I mean, if the Cavs can get some success out of it, then I think it would be a win for them. But as for the Clippers side of it, I mean, Darius Garland is just somebody who continually gets hunted on defense. We know he's not the biggest, so I do think there is a ceiling to Darius Garland's game. While he is a really nice offensive piece, while he really can drive an offense, I do think he needs some help around him, of course. And he's not the only one there with the Clippers. But is that enough to make up for the games that he misses and being a liability on defense? Right now I can't say it is because I do feel like his health held back the Cavs this year. I really, really do because when he was injured against the Pacers this past year, last playoffs, he missed game two. That was the game that the Cavs blew that 7 point lead in the last minute. And I know if the Cavs would have won that game, it'd be a completely different series. But they didn't have Darius Garland at the end of the game to inbound the basketball. They didn't have him to go to the free throw line at the end of the game. They didn't have him, just somebody that you had relied on throughout the entire year. You were not able to go to him late in the game like that when he is supposed to be one of the guys that is there to help you close it out. So instead, you had to rely on a guy like Max Strus or Donovan Mitchell, who had already been shouldering such a load, and Evan Mobley had also been dealing with some injuries as well. So it wasn't all on Darius Garland in Cleveland, but him, shrinking in the playoffs, him not being available, and him just being a liability on defense, those are all real concerns in his game that I think a lot of people, just in this trade in general, were focusing on the age. Like I saw Bleacher Report gave the Cavs a D plus, and they gave the Clippers I think it was an A minus. And I just think that that's just insinuating that the Clippers completely robbed the Cavs, which I just don't think is the case. I don't. So I think it's an interesting move for the Clippers. It seems like a little bit of a organizational shift, moving on from Zubac, bringing in a younger guy like Garland. It does have the possibility to work, but I definitely have my concerns with that trade. So yeah, I think if you're going losers, I think that the Clippers would have to be up there.
Yeah, one note on the Clippers as well. Long term, I don't mind the backcourt of Garland and Mathurin. We know what Mathurin can be.
Mm-hmm.
He's a 20-point per game scorer. He just doesn't offer much else outside of some occasional rebounding and defense. Garland can offer that playmaking and shooting, and then you have
Absolutely.
Kawhi, you have Brook Lopez now playing your starting center position in Los Angeles. So I guess long term, I do think we're going to see the Clippers probably, which you just mentioned, and we'll see what they do in the offseason with Kawhi potentially, Brook Lopez, some of these older vets. Do they try to move off of them? I think that'll be a big question. My biggest loser of this NBA trade deadline, by no surprise to anybody, is the one and only Sacramento Kings because they came into this with the idea of moving off of either Monk, Zach LaVine, DeMar DeRozan, and Domantas Sabonis, some combination or all of those players, and they were able to trade a whopping zero of them. So the trade they did make was to the Cavs when they trade Dennis Schroeder and Keon Ellis to Cleveland to get DeAndre Hunter back. And that trade, I have mixed feelings on that trade, but what I can say positively about that trade is that it gives the Kings financial flexibility after next season when LaVine isn't expiring, when DeRozan isn't expiring, when DeAndre Hunter is also an expiring contract. And at that point, the only core pieces that are older that they would still have around are likely Malik Monk and Domantas Sabonis, two players whose trade values have only diminished the longer they've been a King. So I don't know how easily they're going to be able to trade those players in the offseason. But what I can say for the Kings is that as long as they continue to lose basketball games and play their youth, I won't be mad because they get a top four pick. They get one of these hopefully franchise-changing players at the top of this class, and that should be the agenda for the Kings. I know the Pacers are doing the same thing right now, despite going to the NBA Finals last year. They're at the bottom of the Eastern Conference alongside Washington and a few other teams. So I think my biggest loser definitely would be the Kings. But I also would add, as a loser, I would add the Milwaukee Bucks for once again not just doing the deed and moving off of Giannis. They're clearly not going to win any games. They have 18 wins this year. They're going to be in the lottery. At some point, they have to trade Giannis. As much as that might hurt them as a front office or him from the loyalty aspect, they got to find a way to get something back for one of the greatest players in their franchise's history. It would be a shame if they did the Detroit Tigers card and just let Tarek Skubal walk in a year. If they just let Giannis walk in free agency, like, it is bad business to do it that way. I understand the fame aspect or the aspect of loyalty and this, that, and the other, or just hope. But the hope has ran out for Milwaukee. They got their title with that core, and then they blew up that core. And they kept Giannis around. He's had more injuries now. And Miles Turner has frankly been a terrible addition to their basketball team. And I mean that with all due respect, because I like Miles Turner as a player, but he has regressed in nearly every facet of his game this year with the Bucks. And as a result, they're an 18-win team relying on the likes of Kevin Porter Jr. and Ryan Rollins to win them basketball games. And I think that's a decent backcourt, a very young backcourt, but that's not enough to win you enough games in this league. So I think for sure losers, Bucks, Kings. I think anybody in the Giannis sweepstakes probably is a loser just because they had this ambitious goal of getting Giannis. And they essentially stunted the rest of their trade deadline in order to go and try to get him. The Warriors being an example. They wait on Giannis. They open up Draymond in trade conversations, which we can talk about that. I don't know who would willingly take on his contract for what he produces at. I mean, he probably has more technicals than, like, he has more technicals in some games than he does points. I mean, I'll just say it how it is. But then they pivot and go get Kristaps Porzingis, who has missed most of this year. And in the process, they not only move Jonathan Kuminga, they also trade Buddy Hield away. So it felt like the Warriors were also taking a step back from this season to try to get Porzingis, who I don't even know how much he'll play with the Warriors. I think it was a suspect move on the part of their front office as well. So I think I would throw the Warriors in there as a loser as well, just for the sake of what they did. But overall, I think it, like you said, it was a very active trade deadline. There was a few moves that we didn't expect to happen that happened, and there were a few moves that we did expect to happen that didn't happen.
Yeah, I think the Giannis thing is interesting because it seemed like he was going to get moved. But first of all, has he ever like publicly demanded a trade? I don't think that's come out. So like he's like crossing a fine line here, and I think he is really split between his love and loyalty for Milwaukee and his desire to win another championship. And you know, he's only getting older. You know, he wants to win again, but he's already won one with Milwaukee. That's why I don't think Milwaukee fans would be like mad at him if the Bucks traded him. I think they would realize, look, he won us he won us a championship. You know, he's brought a ton of success to the city of Milwaukee. It just kind of ran its course. You know, we have been unable to put a team around him. So I think fans would be all right with trading him. But I actually like that the Bucks held on to him here at the deadline. I don't think they would have quite gotten the haul that they should get or that they could have gotten. I think they're going to really get a better return for him this offseason because, like you mentioned, the Warriors. The Warriors, they could not put together any sort of package that would be worth it for Giannis. They just couldn't. From the players to the picks, I just don't think that they would be able to. I think we all bring up the Warriors because Giannis playing with Steph, that'd be cool, that'd be fun. We'd all want to see that. But I just don't think that the Bucks would really get what they want in return. I think the Timberwolves probably could have offered the best package. The Knicks, I don't think, are ready to make a move like that yet. They want to see how it plays out one more year with Mikal Bridges and Karl-Anthony Towns, and understandably so. So it seemed like maybe the Cavs, but like I don't think the Cavs want to part with Mobley again. At least not until the end of the year. So it seemed like the Timberwolves were really the only true suitor mid-season to go and get a guy like Giannis. Now, if you wait till the offseason, say the Cavs flame out early again. It could be on the table. Say the Knicks flame out early. Maybe the Heat come into play. The Timberwolves might get a little more aggressive. So I think they made the right move. Well, it sucks. We all want to see Giannis on a contender. We all want to see Giannis playing in big games. It's hard for me to say that the Bucks were losers at this trade deadline because I just think that if they would have traded Giannis for maybe a half, 3/4 of what they could have gotten, I think it would have been an even bigger loss for them. So I like that they're going to hold on to him. I do think, real quick before we move on, I think the Heat have to be considered as a loser here because, look, the Miami Heat, I mean, they're just going to continue to stay in this cycle of, as long as we're in the play-in, we're going to be all right. I mean, because they just, every year they kind of get into the same cycle and, they continually don't make any moves to try and get them back over the hump. I mean, right now, just looking at the standings, they're a game above 500. They're going to be an 8 seed. So, I mean, they're going to be in a play-in. They're going to be kind of middle of the pack next year. They're kind of turning into the Steelers of the NBA, where they're just good enough they're well coached. They're just good enough to stay kind of in that middle of the pack. But it feels like they're lacking that piece or, lacking that big move that could potentially put them over the top and into true contention. So, yet another trade deadline where Pat Riley and company just kind of stand pat, don't really make any moves. And I don't really know what their future direction is at this point, to be completely honest. I think the Heat would be an interesting loser kind of at this deadline.
I'm glad you mentioned Miami because I was just about to bring them up while you were mentioning all the different trade packages. It was reported that the Heat offered Tyler Hero, Kel Ware, and Terry Rozier. Alongside that, I believe it was 2 or 3 first-round picks, some second-round picks. I think some pick swaps were also in there. So in terms of overall trade package, I would say Miami probably had the first or second best one alongside Minnesota, who almost got Giannis. And that would have been an insane pairing with Anthony Edwards and Giannis. You would have to assume Julius Randle and Jaden McDaniels would be out of Minnesota in a trade. And I kind of like that Minnesota didn't pivot off of McDaniels specifically. I think he's very important for what they do defensively. And I mean, Rudy Gobert is their entire defense. If it was me, I would personally move out Gobert, try to keep McDaniels if I had to pick between one or the other. However, they know what Rudy Gobert's impact is for them as a defensive team. So pairing him with Ant and Giannis would help their defense. My question would be, how good would a Giannis Gobert front court work? Like, how well would it work together? I guess that would be my only concern for them. And then they also have Naz Reid. They can obviously stagger the minutes, but I do think I can agree to some extent about Miami being a loser. It does feel like they're kind of just they're in no man's land. They're trying to play in the middle with what they have. Heroes missed too many games. Bam has taken a step back this year. Their best player in terms of consistency this year has actually been Norman Powell. So I think Miami's a team that is, as you said, a loser in this trade deadline. A team who was in the middle and was able to make a decision, make a direction for their team was the Bulls. So I'm going to say that they're not a loser and the Bulls would be a winner because they picked a direction. They pivoted off of Nikola Vucevic. They traded Kobe White. They traded a lot of guys, actually. Ayo Dosunmu as well to Minnesota. And they were able to say, we're going to rebuild. We don't think we have enough right now. So I think credit to Chicago for doing that. It felt like they were building up a good core, but it felt like there was going to be an odd man out between Kobe White and Josh Giddey. It feels like they've picked Josh Giddey, and they obviously sent Kobe White packing. But with all of that in mind, we haven't had a chance to dive too extensively into the James Harden trade to the Cavs. I know you want to talk about it. I want to talk about it from the Kings' perspective because the two teams also just played last night. We got a glimpse of James Harden as a Cav. We got a glimpse of the Kings playing their youth movement, and some very good performances for them also took place. So I'll give the floor to you to kind of talk about the Cavs, James Harden, how you think it's going to go, and then also last night's game.
Yeah, so when this trade first broke, when the news first broke that it was rumored it was gaining steam, I didn't really jump out of my seat and be like, oh my God, the Cavs are going all in. At first I was like, Well, how much better is James Harden than Darius Garland? I don't think this is really something that elevates the Cavs as much as they quite need. While it is an upgrade, I don't know how much better it makes them. And then the more I'm kind of talking myself into it, I think there's a lot more positives than there are negatives here. I think it's a lot safer of a trade for the Cavs. So everybody looks to the age. Oh my God, why would you give up 26-year-old Darius Garland for a 36-year-old James Harden? Well, the Cavs' main goal has to be to win a championship this year or next year. Donovan Mitchell, he's had to shoulder a massive load to this point. If the Cavs flame out again early in these playoffs, it's very highly unlikely that he is going to sign an extension. So the Cavs kind of have to at least make the Eastern Conference Finals this year, or at least show that they are Finals contenders to try and get Donovan Mitchell to stay here. And of course, this is a move that you consult Donovan Mitchell before. You don't just go and trade for James Harden and break up your core four, if you will, without consulting Donovan Mitchell. So the more you kind of talk yourself into it, I think it's an upgrade, right? Darius Garland just had the injury history. We were talking about it before. He has been unreliable in the playoffs because he's been unavailable. And as good as Darius Garland is when he's on the floor, and as a Cavs fan, I have loved him. I've loved getting to watch him play. I think he fits really well with what the Cavs do, but I think James Harden is just an even better fit. I think he's a more experienced guy. He's a little bit bigger. He is a better defender. Because that's kind of the problem with Darius Garland. He gets hunted on defense because he's small. Obviously, the injury history probably doesn't help that, especially because they're toe injuries. So I think it's a much safer move for the Cavs. The best way I can describe it, it raises both their floor and their ceiling, to be completely honest with you, right? Because the floor right now is the Cavs without Darius Garland. And I think that, yeah, they can win without Darius Garland, but can they win a finals? I doubt it. But now it's very much more likely that you're going to have James Harden in the lineup, especially come playoff time, because he doesn't miss as many games. And I think he's going to raise the ceiling for both Evan Mobley and Jarrett Allen. I mean, you saw with Jarrett Allen last night. He was 11 for 12. He had like 29 points. He had double-digit rebounds. That's kind of been the Cavs' problem as well. On top of, they get this soft narrative because Jarrett Allen he'll have like 5 rebounds in a playoff game, or Mitchell Robinson will come into the fourth quarter against the Knicks on Christmas Day and he'll have like 7 rebounds in the fourth quarter, a couple offensive creating extra possessions for the Knicks, and those are the types of things that cost you the game. So if Jarrett Allen can kind of pick up the physicality a little bit, maybe James Harden contributes to that. But just between running the pick and roll, I can't wait to see James Harden and Evan Mobley on the court together. I think that's going to be fun to watch for the Cavs. So yeah, I think this is a move that raises the floor for the Cavs. I think it definitely makes you more confident if you are a Cavs fan. I think the Cavs' chances of winning the finals just increased drastically compared to as if you were, kind of wishy-washy on Darius Garland's health. So I think between, James Harden working in the pick and roll with Evan Mobley, Jarrett Allen, I think he's going to raise your bigs. I think he raises the overall floor of your entire team. So I like this move for the Cavs. It's an all-in move. Who knows what the future is going to look like? We're going to have to see how this plays out. How the season ends is really going to determine what they do next year, because I think we're both in agreement that LeBron is going to be coming back to the Cavs next year. It's kind of his only option, and that's a different topic for another day. But yeah, overall, I like the move for the Cavs. We talked a little bit about the Clippers. Don't really know how to feel about them. I think Darius Garland's just kind of a wild card. Maybe he can have better health out in LA, but I think this was a move the Cavs needed to make.
And one other note on the Cavs side of this as well. James Harden gives Donovan Mitchell a chance to not have to be on the ball all the time. He can play off ball a little bit more. James Harden isn't the greatest off ball player, but he's going to be able to do what he does best at this point in his career, and that's facilitate, that's playmate, that's operate in the pick and roll, get downhill, and work with two pretty good bigs for James Harden in Cleveland with what they have and their rim running capabilities. For Mobley, he can run the pick and pop, he can knock down that mid range jump shot as well. So I think he opens up the versatility of the Cavs offense, and when we get into the playoffs, it won't have to be Donovan Mitchell ball every single possession. James Harden will be able to shoulder some of that load better than Darius Garland would be able to, because of, as you've mentioned it, the unavailability, but then also what Darius Garland has looked like in the playoffs. And we all know the James Harden memes about him in the playoffs, but I would still take him in the playoffs over Darius Garland in the playoffs. I think they're two different players. I think Harden will fit better defensively. I agree on that. But then also, the floor raising aspect that you mentioned is the biggest key here. I think it increases their chances of getting farther into the playoffs. Finals, I don't know. And that's a conversation for a different day just because the East feels very wide open. The Celtics have remained steady in the top three of the East. You've got the Pistons. We don't know what they're going to look like in their second year of postseason promise after making it last year. The Knicks will obviously probably be there in the end in the Eastern Conference Finals. But then also, you have a couple other teams that have just very quietly out of the teams in the Eastern Conference. Toronto has had a very good year. They've got some pieces, and they're led by Scotty Barnes, Brandon Ingram. They're similar to how Charlotte is built. They have several guys that can score the basketball, but I think defensively is going to have to be the key for Toronto if they want to advance farther. But then also, we have to talk about Joel Embiid and the Sixers because this man has basically one leg, barely one leg. He just came off a month averaging just under 30 points per game. His minutes have finally ramped back up, so he's playing similarly to how he did in his MVP season. And you factor that in with how Tyrese Maxey has looked. He's averaging almost 29, 30 points a game. The Sixers, if they can remain healthy, I think they've got a really good core to potentially get past the second round and into the Eastern Conference Finals. It's going to depend on matchup, but I like their wings. I like VJ Edgecombe. I like Kelly Oubre. Paul George is what he is at this point, but he's still a defender and a three-point shooter, and he can contribute in that way. So I like the Sixers' ability to make a run if they can stay healthy, and that is a huge if. It is a huge if. But it's the same question we'll always have to ask. Like, if Joel Embiid is capable of playing on the court at a somewhat healthy rate, who is defending him? And you factor that in with how Tyrese Maxey has looked. He's one of the best guards in the conference at this point. The Sixers are going to be a team to monitor as well here into the second half of the season. So I think that could factor into how the Cavs might look postseason, how far they might get. But I just want to show some love for Toronto, Boston, and the Sixers because those are three teams that are definitely going to play a role in how the Eastern Conference plays out in the postseason.
Yeah, the thing with Philly is they have some depth too. Obviously not having McCann anymore might hurt them, but and you've got Drummond coming off the bench. You got Quentin Grimes. I mean, they've got guys that can come off the bench as well. So it's not just Tyrese Maxey. It's not just Embiid. Not having Paul George might hurt them a little bit as well. But between Edgecombe, Maxey, and Embiid, yeah, I think this could be an interesting team. It's not going to be an easy out in the playoffs. They could be make a team like the Cavs or maybe even the Knicks. Make them work in a series a little bit. Maybe in that second round. So. Yeah, it's been been a while since we've seen Joel Embiid really healthy, with a good team around him in the playoffs. So I think that'll certainly be interesting. Very well could be a team to watch.
So now I will give my assessment of this game that we were talking about for the Sacramento Kings side of things. So the classic tank move last night rested their entire core, essentially gave them, probably fake injuries. And except DeAndre Hunter, he actually got his eye destroyed the other night, and he actually will probably be missing a very long stretch of games. So, ironically, Kings acquire player gets hurt, but it helps them tank. So I guess it's a blessing in disguise. For the Kings, they would have seen what they had in these young players without having to blow everything up. Like even a few years ago, we all have seen what Keon Ellis can be for a team. So play him. Don't sit him on your bench. But this comes back to roster management, how you build up a roster, what that roster consists of. The Kings have had way too many guards for way too long, and that's why guys like Devin Carter and Keon Ellis get their DMPs. And now we finally get a chance to see how Devin Carter looks, how Neat Clifford looks when you trade away some of these guys because, frankly, there's not enough minutes for how many guys should probably be playing on the Kings on a nightly basis, and that's because you have so many veterans. And I know you're not as hopeful or optimistic as I was of the Neat Clifford performance last night because your argument was that the Cavs don't play defense. My argument would be the Kings only score 110.8 points per game. I believe that's second worst in the league. They don't score the basketball. no matter who the team is that they're playing. But they were able to put up 126 last night. Nate Clifford had 30 points, 5 of 9 from three. He just had a very well-rounded game. He chipped in some rebounding, some passing, and some defense, and he just in sync late into that first half, and he really just turned it on. I mean, he got off to a good start, 9 points in the first quarter, but he showed the promise that a lot of us saw in March Madness with him being at Colorado State and the run that that team went on and his performance in the biggest stage like that. I think he has a good NBA game. I'm curious to see how he would look next to Keegan Murray. But then also, talking about Devin Carter, he just needs to figure out the jump shot. I think watching him in comparison to Russ, there's definitely some similarities. They're both really good rebounding guards. They're both able to get downhill and finish at the rim, but they also both struggle to shoot the basketball. So I think if Devin Carter can figure out that side of his game, he'll be a much tougher cover for NBA teams, and he'll earn more minutes. I don't envision Russell Westbrook returning to Sacramento this year or after this season. I think the future at the guard position will more than likely be Devin Carter and Nate Clifford as a big two guard, unless they land in the lottery somewhere where they take one of those guards like Phylan or they take Flemings or whoever it may be. I think the Kings definitely, if they manage this properly, I don't want to say like stunt the rebuild and turn it into something it's not, but I think they could definitely put the accelerator on in terms of the rebuild and speeding up the process. And that way, when they get to 2027, they know what they have on their team. And when they have that financial flexibility, they know what they can go add to their basketball team to try and win games in 2028, 2029, and 2030. But until that happens, the Kings will be bad. They will continue to be bad. I don't know even how good of a coach Doug Christie is, to be honest with you. But I think there were definitely some positives from the game last night as well on the Kings side of things. Not the same positives as it would be for the Cavs. Donovan Mitchell and James Harden combined for 32 fourth quarter points yesterday in beating the Kings. So I think that is the future for the Cavs, is having two guys in the clutch that can take over a game. James Harden has been a very good second half player all year. And honestly, it's been his best scoring season in, I think, 4 years now. I mean, he's up to almost 26 points per game. So I think for the Kings, it's definitely a completely different conversation as what it would be for the Cavs. But I think moving forward, there are some bright spots for both of these teams that they can rely on as they end their seasons.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned James Harden having one of his best seasons. Offensively. I mean, he's shooting 42% from the field, 35% from three. I mean, it's really some of his better numbers. In past years, and averaging about 25 points a game. Again, that's a season high in about the last 6 seasons. So yeah, the only thing with the Cavs just is that obviously they'll be different defensively with Mobley, and they give about 116 points per game this season. But yeah, I mean the Kings definitely have some young talent. It's just it's why some of their moves at the deadline were a little head scratching. I mean, you go when you trade for a guy like DeAndre Hunter. Maybe they feel like a change of scenery could be best for DeAndre Hunter. He's just somebody. He's having career lows across the board right now in terms of just shooting wise. I mean, he is not playing as good as he was last year, because when the Cavs made that trade last year, the Cavs, the big thing, they needed a big wing, and we saw it in the playoffs. DeAndre Hunter, played big until he had that finger injury. So maybe there's some hope there that the Kings can kind of get him turned around a little bit. But you mentioned all these young guys, and then it just feels like Russell Westbrook is kind of sitting there, maybe stunting the growth of some of these guys. He had 7 turnovers last night, missed a couple of shots late in the game because the Kings were up 7 with about 3.5, 4 minutes to go. So I mean, it's not like they were playing from behind all night. I mean, the Cavs were ahead for most of the first half, but the Kings were in it. I mean, this was a competitive game. It's not like that's why the last thing I want is when you talk about how good Harden played, how good the Cavs were able to come through. Everyone's, it's the Kings. They won 12 games. Well, I mean, they played good last. I mean, they shot 50% from the field. I mean, this is probably one of the better games the Kings have played over the course of the last couple of weeks. So there's definitely some promising things with the Kings here. They definitely have some young talent, but as we've seen in the NBA, a lot of these teams, with this young talent are just kind of put in a weird spot, because they kind of made moves at the deadline. Like we talked the Jazz and the Wizards, they made moves at the deadline, but it doesn't feel like you're going to reap the benefits of that, just now. And as for the Kings, I think it's kind of the same way. A lot of this young talent, you're kind of waiting to see if it'll pay off, down the line. So it's kind of hard to judge right now. It's kind of hard to get a gauge on just how good and effective all this is going to be, until next season.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the overall outlook for a lot of the rebuilding teams is they made moves that we don't typically see tanking teams make, but they made those moves thinking about future seasons, and that doesn't happen too often. We saw a lot more of it in this NBA trade deadline, but I think it could lead to a fascinating offseason and also next season overall when we maybe see less teams tanking. The draft class next year isn't expected to be nearly as elite as this one right now. So I can't really blame teams for tanking in February. And we'll talk about that now. Like, the NBA was supposed to address the tanking, they were supposed to address all of the different provisions for that. And that's why they reworked their lottery percentages for if you're the number one worst team, your odds are less likely now. Teams 1, 2, and 3, same odds at the number one pick. And that was put in place to, I guess, reduce the level of tanking. But what that also did was it ensured if you're, say, the worst team in the league, if you're inside that top 1, 2, or 3, you're almost guaranteed by default a top 5 pick. So the teams are going to bank on the luck knowing they've got that backhand insurance policy of, all right, we'll at least be in the top 5. So I think the league has to find a way to limit the tanking. Either they need to put in true anti-tanking provisions that will limit teams from even attempting to tank, like what the Wizards and Pacers have been doing of late, or they embrace tanking, understanding that it's a necessary part of team building. Some of these teams simply have to tank because that's the best way for them to reset their team and move forward. If they try to not tank, it's only going to end up being a situation where you're like the Heat or you're like the Hawks or you're like the Bulls, where you're a consistent year in and year out play-in team. Every year the play-in has existed, some combination of the Hawks, Bulls, and Heat have been in the play-in. All 4 years of the play-in, I think. So I think if it was me, I would embrace the aspect of tanking because it is necessary. Some teams have to do it. In the Kings' case, they've tanked without actually resting players most of the year. Their veterans just haven't been winning games, so they're kind of tanking in disguise. For some of these other teams, though, like what the Wizards did, blatantly sitting your entire young roster, already young roster, you don't necessarily have anybody to tank because none of them are that elite level player that would catapult you to winning a game. I do think that might be a conversation that needs to be had because the league has kind of punted the idea of punishing these teams when they said they were going to, and now they're not.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's just interesting because there's really nothing that you can do. It's the same in the NFL, and there's nothing you really can do to prevent tanking because it's just the way that the draft, works. Teams that lose, you have a better chance of getting a higher pick. But I did see somebody throw around the idea that maybe after like March 1st, because after that point you still have what about a month and a half left of the regular season. After March 1st, you kind of flip it, and the teams with the best record after that would have the better chance, to get the higher draft pick, if that makes sense. So whatever teams are either out of playoff contention or in, a certain bottom portion of the league, at that point you kind of reward the winning, which I guess would make sense, right? I mean, I honestly, I think that would kind of directly fix everything because, you think about it, then teams would just simply be trying to win because there would be the benefit to winning. Right now, you kind of feel like there's no benefit to winning, which I think is kind of where the NBA struggles at because, like a team like the Jazz or the Wizards, what do they get out of trying to win? You say you won a couple of games, but it doesn't necessarily help you in the draft lottery. But again, I feel like it might not hurt teams this year because of how loaded the rookie draft class is going to be. There's a ton of guys in college this year, freshmen that are balling out. Teams are, going to get some steals right around that 7, 8, 9 spot in the draft. So, maybe you don't necessarily need to tank quite as much this season, but no, it is definitely an issue that the NBA will probably have to address here very shortly.
And one last thing on it too, a lot of a lot of these teams that are in the bottom, probably fourth of the league, they're not exactly suitable markets. Like, not a lot of players want to go play for those teams or in those cities. Not a lot of people probably want to go to Milwaukee, who is only an 18-win team. I know there's not a lot of players who would want to play in Sacramento, despite how packed their arena is every single night. Probably one of the best fan bases in the league. It's Sacramento. Like, who wants to go play there? It is the capital of California, but there's many people who probably don't even know that because they don't think about it. Um, Places like Washington, like Charlotte, not a lot of free agent signings happen in those places, and so a lot of times these teams feel it's necessary that they need as much homegrown talent as possible, which means working through the draft. And in some cases, that also requires these teams to be even better at the trading aspect of the league than other teams, but that doesn't tend to happen. So I think for some places where you kind of play in an undesirable location or your state taxes or this, that, and the other, because that's why a lot of players want to go play in Florida with Miami because state tax is it's an income tax. It's not like a thing. So I guess for me, should be allowed, but only up to a certain point. It shouldn't be blatant. We're not playing our entire rotation today. We're going to play our two ways and whoever else. I just think it needs to be structured to where it can be embraced, but it needs to be embraced with a fine line, which is what some of these teams are not doing right now. So I think overall that's kind of just what I would say to wrap that up. We've got just under 15 minutes here for the episode. We're going to do a quick Super Bowl preview, the game later tonight. We're going to get this posted before the game, hopefully at like 6 o'clock, so we can get people to get eyes on it prior. But give me your thoughts on the Super Bowl. What do you envision happening? Um, Fun fact: Madden just did their simulator, and the Patriots won 30-14. It does not matter. It doesn't mean anything. They also a college football
I think
simulator.
that same simulation had Miami beating Indiana like 50-17 or something in the
Yeah,
national championship. So
college football did a sim. Miami won like 55-7 or something over Indiana.
yeah, I
Obviously, it
was
did
like,
not
give me a
happen,
break.
but just to throw it out there for fun, like, what do you see happening in this Super Bowl though?
Well, I'm gonna say right now, I think it's gonna be low scoring, but that does not mean that it's a bad Super Bowl. Like just because it's not a shootout doesn't mean it's a bad Super Bowl, right? Like last year was a blowout. Would you rather have? I mean, obviously, you're probably the wrong person to ask, but would you rather have a because you were an Eagles fan, you liked the blowout last year. Would you rather have a blowout or a close game? I'd rather have a close game. Like yeah, last year it was cool to see the Eagles on full display, but like that game was over by halftime. What was it, 35-0 at one point? Like
Yeah,
I don't want to see that. But what I can see is, wouldn't shock me if this is like a 13-3 game, like a Patriots Rams repeat kind of thing that we had a couple of years ago. Now, I like the Seahawks offense. I think the Seahawks probably win. I think they're favored for a reason. But if this Patriots front four can get after Sam Darnold and throw him off his game a little bit, then the Patriots got a chance because, I mean, obviously we've seen Sam Darnold shrink in these bigger games before. Hasn't been the case this year. Sam Darnold has been great this year. He's been very impressive. I think he's got all the right pieces around him. He's utilizing JSN perfectly. I think Cooper Kupp could be in for a big game. Charbonnet is out, which might be a bit of a blow for the Seahawks, but I think the Seahawks should win. I'll probably go like 17-10, 14-10. I don't think it's going to be a big win. I think it is going to be a close game. It is going to come down to the wire. But the Seahawks defense is just too good. I mean, from the back end of the trenches, they're so hard to move the football. And Drake May has struggled in these playoffs. I mean, he only put up 10 points last week. I know the snow didn't really help that. But even before it started snowing, I mean, Drake May, I mean, they weren't really, you know, launching the ball down the field. I mean, so this offense, I do have my concerns. I think it could be a big Stephon Diggs game. I think he's at like 4.5 catches right now. I don't see how Drake May doesn't absolutely feed him against the Seahawks zone coverage. So I think the Seahawks should win. It's probably going to be a little bit more low scoring, but that doesn't mean it's a bad Super Bowl.
I think if it's lower scoring, it increases New England's chances of winning. However,
Interesting.
I also feel like Seattle is more than likely at least going to eclipse over 26 and a half points. So like 27 or more. I think that I know the game line is set at 44 and a half. So that for people like an under would be 24 to 20, over would be 25 to 20. I definitely could see it being like a 24 to 20 type of game. I do think it's going to hover around that game line. However, I envision Seattle scoring more than what is probably the line right now. I think they're going to be closer to 27. New England probably in that 17-point range. Like I would lean 27-17 Seattle. That's just my opinion. But I think if New England can muck this
I
game
think
up,
it's a lot. That's a lot of points. I think 20. That's a lot of points for a Patriots defense that's given up 7, 16, and 3. I don't know, man. That seems like a lot of points if you ask
I
me.
also
But I mean,
think
the
this
Seahawks
is
offense is clicking.
yeah. I was just going to say this also probably is the best offense they will have played in quite some time, if
Yeah,
not all year, as we know. And
yeah,
I think
that's fair.
for Seattle with how well they're clicking offensively right now, if they can get out to a lead, put pressure on New England, I also expect Seattle's defense to give the Seahawks some short fields. I think their kick return game could do the same with Rashid Shaheed, who might play a big role in the Super Bowl. So I just think if Seattle's defense can either get crucial stops or turnovers and win the special teams game, giving their offense some short fields as well, I could definitely see them putting up 27 points. It really just comes down to like, can you stop JSN? Can you put pressure on Sam Darnold? Sam Darnold has never actually defeated the Patriots in his NFL career. Fun fact. So just something to monitor in this game as well. The infamous Seeing Ghost game happened against New England when he was on the Jets. So I think right now, if I had to put my money on it, like yes, Seattle is going to win the game. I think at the 4.5 point favorite. I think that's a good line. Um, I know 10 points seems like a lot, but with the way these two teams have played in the postseason, it's almost a tale of two different sides. I feel like New England's squeaked out a couple of games, and especially that AFC Championship game. I mean, they only scored 10 points against the Broncos, and that's understandable because of that defense. But they won that game because their defense held Jared Stidham and the Broncos to 7. That's the reality of it. They didn't play well offensively at all. They didn't play well offensively any of the games prior. So I think I mean, CJ Stroud had 4, 5 turnovers against them, and the Texans were
Hmm.
still in the game in the fourth quarter. So I just think Seattle would be out of all the teams New England has played in the postseason. I think Seattle is the team most likely to take the most advantage of those turnovers. Like I think they'd be the team to most likely take advantage of those turnovers, turn those turnovers into points, and also continuing to fluster Drake May and that passing attack. I think Seattle's run defense has to win this game in the trenches. They cannot let the combination of Ramondre Stevenson and Travion Henderson get going. If they do, then it becomes way easier for New England. They don't have to throw the ball 35 times. They can run a lot of play action. They can put pressure on Seattle in that way and maybe possess the ball a little bit more. But I think that's unlikely. I think Seattle's definitely their zone coverage is tricky. I think it is going to come down to how Drake May can read their defense. We know he loves to put the ball in the air, and if they can get a few turnovers, I think they win this game. So if it is lower scoring, like how you mentioned it, 17-10, I would actually lean New England. I think they have the personnel to keep this game lower scoring and also win it in a lower scoring game. They've already done that a couple of times here in the playoffs. So I guess that'd be my overall take on it. Um, if JSN has like 6 or 7 catches, he probably has 120 yards, and New England probably loses the game. So it is going to come down to how they can defend him. He's very hard to defend because of all the pre-snap motion, and they do a great job at putting him in places to succeed offensively. But work is cut out for Christian Gonzalez today for sure. There's some sneaky players for Seattle that could contribute. I mean, Cooper Kupp still exists. Rashid Shaheed is probably going to catch like one pass for 35 yards downfield and give Seattle some momentum. Kenneth Walker in the run game isn't necessarily huge, But it is important that they can protect Sam Darnold. I do agree on that. So it is probably going to come down to the trenches and defense in this game, but I have to lean Seattle in that aspect.
And we haven't really seen Sam Darnold get thrown off his game the past couple of games, right? Because the Seahawks defense has come up big for them, and he shredded the Rams last week. I mean, Sam Darnold has looked good. Last year he kind of flamed out at the end of the year, and I think that's kind of why the Vikings didn't hang on to him. I think they felt that there was a certain ceiling with Sam Darnold, so that's why they kind of let him go. They went with the cheaper option, J.J. McCarthy, and I think it kind of hurt them this year. But Sam Darnold's been playing great, and if he can continue to play the way that he has been, then yeah, I think the Seahawks will absolutely win. And they certainly can reach that point total that you had mentioned. But this Patriots defense has forced some turnovers. I think whoever wins the turnover battle, I think is going to win the game. I think it's simple as that. And we've just seen that the Patriots have been more prone to turnovers than Seattle has. So it's kind of going to be a strength on strength here, the Seattle offense versus the Patriot defense. I think it's going to be a good matchup. I think it's going to be a lot closer of a game. But I think a lot of people are projecting that. So I just hope we can get a good come down to the wire game. Maybe one of these teams has a chance to put together a game-winning drive. As long as it's close down to the end, I think it's going to be the best product possible. And I really don't envision a blowout here, unless the Patriot offense just is a complete no-show. But I think they're too well coached to do that. I think Josh McDaniel is going to have them ready to go. They're going to have a good game plan. I know it's a good Seattle defense, but unless Seattle's defense comes out and just shuts it down, plays lights out from the jump, I don't really see how we don't get a close game here.
Who is your Super Bowl MVP under the parameters of your prediction?
So, I mean, would they give it to a skill player? Like, say Kenneth Walker comes out and is able to have a huge game. Like, do you think they would give it to a skill player? Because I could see Jackson Smith and Jigba, winning this Super Bowl MVP. I know Cooper Kupp won it a couple of years ago, so they've shown that they can give it to receivers. But I mean, if JSN comes out, has a touchdown, has over 100 yards, and maybe Sam Darnold doesn't really light the world on fire statistically, say it's a 17-7 game, and Jackson Smith and Jigba has 8 catches for 120 yards and a touchdown, and maybe has a big catch at the end of the game. I think that'd be enough to win it. But if the Patriots win it, I mean, I would love to see this go to a defensive player. Say Marcus Jones has a pick six. Say the Patriots defense is really the story. I think it'd be cool to see a defensive player win it, but right now it's hard to imagine somebody other than like Drake May, JSN, or Sam Darnold winning it.
I believe in this would have been 2013, 14, or 15, but Von Miller won it when Denver defeated, I think it was Carolina in the Super Bowl. So I just
like 2015, yeah, it was like 11 years ago, yeah.
It is possible a defensive player could win it. I think it's more likely a New England defensive player would win it than a Seattle defensive player. But I also think it's more likely a Seattle skill player wins it than a New England skill player would win it. And if it comes down to the quarterbacks and in terms of likeliness to win it, you almost have to say that one's a wash because Drake May probably wins it by default for New England. And for Seattle, although there's options, it really just comes down to how Sam Darnold plays. I'm personally going Jackson Smith and Jigba because he, game in and game out all year, has shown up, has put up some monstrous stat lines, and it has not mattered who has defended him. So I don't envision him magically having a bad game here either. If he's over 100 yards, he's got 7-8 catches, he comes up clutch down the stretch, and he has a touchdown or two, he'll more than likely win this award. And as we saw a few years ago with Cooper Kupp, he won it. If Odell Beckham Jr. didn't get hurt, he probably would have won it instead of Cooper Kupp. But that's not what happened. So I do think under my prediction, I'm going to have to roll with Jackson Smith and Jigba as Super Bowl MVP here. Well, let's say Sam Darnold has like 250 and 2 touchdowns, but Smith and Jigba has half of his yards. I think Smith and Jigba probably wins the Super Bowl MVP.
Yeah, and I think it'd be cool to see another receiver win it, because that means that they'd have a big game. I do think Stephon Diggs would have a chance, though, because, I mentioned I think he's going to go over 4.5 catches. I think he's going to have a big game. This kind of shapes up to be a Stephon Diggs game. I mean, look, we know he was with Buffalo. I mean, how many times did he lose to the Chiefs in the playoffs? He's been close all these years. Yeah, I know he's come close with the Vikings. So now he's finally getting his chance to play in the big game And he's kind of Drake May's security blanket. He likes Diggs and those quick, zone reads, those quick curl routes in the zone coverage. So I could see him having a big game if the Patriots win it. I don't know if you can necessarily say it's going to be Drake May for sure, because it's kind of the same way we talked about Jackson Smith and Jig. But what if Stephon Diggs has a similar game, say 10 catches, 100 yards, and a touchdown, has a big catch late in the game, kind of to ice the game? I could see Stephon Diggs being in the conversation.
Definitely. It'll be an exciting game. I'm definitely looking forward to it. I plan to watch it. I won't be watching with as much anxiety or nervousness or excitement as I did last year as the Eagles decimated the Chiefs, but I'll still be watching because it's what we do. It's part of our American pastimes. And as always, we'll get to see all of the outlandish Super Bowl commercials that will more than likely be presented to us tonight. So, want to thank everybody for tuning in to another episode of Beyond the Box Score, episode 20 now in the books. Trayvon Hastings, Joey Korzanowski, want to thank everybody for tuning into this one, wherever you watched, on whatever various platform, like, subscribe, share, whatever it is you do on that platform. We appreciate the love and support. You can also share and send it to whoever you want, the episode, the clips, whatever it may be. But we'll definitely, coming back after the weekend, we'll recap the Super Bowl. We'll also probably take a look at some MLB stuff that we didn't get a chance to talk about going on in the league, specifically the Detroit Tigers, among other teams, and what they were able to do this week. But we'll save that for episode 21. We want to thank everybody for listening once again, and we'll catch you guys in the next one.